Two minutes past 12, you are listening to the Mid-Morning Talk on Salam Media with me, Mario Mukwanda. If you take a look at the world's wealthiest people, you'll find a few self-made barons on the list. But a whole bunch of the world's aristocrats have never known anything else because they were born swimming in money. Average people who make smart decisions can give a leg up to their kids and grandkids by building wealth, even modest wealth, growing it, protecting it, defending it, and passing it down to give a boost to those who will follow. And if you want to know how to build generational wealth, then listen up. Joining me is Gerald Mwandiambira from the South African Savings Institute. Good day, Gerald, and thank you for joining me.
Good day, and it's always a pleasure. Good afternoon to all your listeners.
All right, so before we build generational wealth, we need to understand it better. So, what is it, and why is it important?
Well, generational wealth is really the wealth transfer from one generation to another. And the reason why it's important is because we all want a better lifestyle and standard of living for our children and our children's children, we assume. And if you want that to happen, it has to be planned and it has to be very deliberate. Otherwise, what you have is that one generation simply starts afresh and the next one starts afresh, and the family doesn't really grow in wealth. And generational wealth is that wealth which allows children to be born into a family where they actually have things to look forward to in life.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, when you're talking about things to look forward in life, what are you talking about?
Look, it's as simple as having somewhere to live, funds for education. You want the basics to be taken care of. And a lot of people spend 20 years purchasing a property. Now imagine if you're born into a family which already has lots of property. It takes away that burden and it allows you to basically live life at a different level.
Mm-hmm. All right. How does one build generational wealth?
Well, the first thing about building generational wealth, I suppose, is to have the life policies and the type of assets which allow you to be left to the children. So property is something that's very important. A business is something that's very important because those are things which, if God forbid you should pass away, you should be able to leave those for your children and your children's children. So anything that allows you to leave it for your children and your children's children is potentially something that can be used to build generational wealth.
All right. And what does transitioning generational wealth mean?
Transitioning generational wealth is really generational wealth which is transferred through something like a life policy. So, for example, if you pass away and leave a lump sum, and that will transition to your next generation because they will be nominated as beneficiaries. It's not the same as a house, which would already be possible to transfer once you own.
Well, now, is there a process? How do you pass on generational wealth? Is there a process involved?
There's definitely a process. I would say start by getting yourself a professional financial planning professional, and let that advisor plan your generational wealth for you. Normally, if you have the services of a financial planner, they would sit down with you and then you would work out everything you need to do. And a generational wealth transfer goes hand in hand with you also having a will to bequeath your assets to those who remain behind. So it's a process and that which starts with a will where you take stock of all the assets you have, or the assets you want to acquire, and then finally who you want to bequeath them to. And also the part of generational wealth planning is to pay for death taxes because many people don't realize that there is a cost to dying. So there's estate duty, executors' fees, and other taxes that are due the moment you pass away, especially if you pass away and have a number of assets which are deemed to attract tax.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And is it possible for generational wealth to be lost? So can one generation have it and then the next generation loses it?
Definitely. Generational wealth is like starting your life with a lump sum or a lotto.
Mm-hmm.
For generational wealth to be preserved, you also need to go hand in hand with educating your children and your children's children about valuing the assets which you are going to leave behind. So if it's a
Mm-hmm.
business, it's about teaching your children how the business runs, how to keep it profitable, and how to respect the staff and the business so that it can last beyond one generation. When children and children's children don't take an interest in the wealth that you're accumulating, often what happens is when they get the opportunity, they will simply spend, 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 and forget to create. And that's how generational wealth is easily depleted, destroyed.
Mm-hmm. I guess in that case, children need to learn that my money is my money, and you have to go and work for your own money. Then we can combine it, and then we can create our generational wealth together. Right now,
Well, I think well, not even my money is my money. It's really when you're talking generational wealth, our money is our money. And
mhm.
if you grow up with that in mind, that what's my father's is mine, what's mine is my father's, you have that respect for the wealth and the assets that you have.
Mhm. All right. So, you earlier you spoke about assets such as property being a great way to build generational wealth. And what else can one do, especially those who are starting off small and don't have enough to actually purchase an asset such as property?
The simplest way to start a generational wealth process is possibly just to acquire a life policy, which is a
Mm-hmm.
policy that will pay out a lump sum to your dependents or your nominated beneficiaries should you pass on. So that's the cheapest way because that lump sum often allows, the next generation to enjoy what you have what you have left them. So the most affordable way to leave generational wealth is probably through a life policy. You can also buy shares, units, trusts, which are not as expensive as obviously buying a property.
Mm-hmm.
Cars are not great for generational wealth because they lose value. But again, you can leave a car for your child. So any asset that can stand the test of time can be used for generational wealth transfer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what are some of the mistakes we make, and how can we avoid them?
The biggest mistake is lack of education. So
Yeah.
if you want to avoid making financial mistakes, start taking an interest in your finances. Learn from your elders, learn from your family, discuss money freely with your family in terms of your giving as well as your spending, so that money is not something that is a secret. The more you know and the more knowledge you have, then you'll be able to go out there and hire someone to be your counselor. So in the multitude of counselors, there's great wisdom. So we basically want to then hire a counselor, such as a financial planning professional, to help you, and that will then set you off on your way. The biggest mistake by far is simply lack of knowledge and lack of interest in knowing how money works or how wealth is created and how wealth is preserved.
Mm-hmm. All right, Gerald, thank you so much for your time. But quickly, before you go, what are some takeaway points? What should we remember?
I think we should remember that generational wealth is a choice. If your family is a family that is deciding you want to create wealth for all your generations, make it part of your um, family plan. Discuss it with all the elders and all the generations and start building that generational wealth. Also, remember, generational wealth transfer requires education of those who will follow. So, if it's a business or property, you still need the ones who are following to know how to maintain it and how to keep value in that particular asset. And lastly, If all else fails, simply seek help and get a professional to sit down with you and your family and start the process of creating generational wealth for your children and your children's children.
Right. Thank you so much for your time, Gerald. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
All right. If you've ever thought about how life would have felt much easier if you had graduated from school without any debt, or wish you had inherited a large sum of money, alternatively, are you someone who was able to get ahead early in life because your family supports you financially? Regardless of your situation, you may already understand the value of generational wealth without knowing it. It's a method of boosting our financial wellness, so much so that we can ensure the financial wellness of our children and perhaps their children, and so on. Perhaps you're focused on your personal finances, but if you're thinking about starting or growing your family anytime soon, now is a great time to learn how to build generational wealth. And Gerald gave us an explanation on what generational wealth is. It's a wealth that is passed down within a family from one generation to the next. The first generation accumulates property during their lifetime, which they then pass down to their children. With successful and proper planning, those children can then pass down wealth to their children, and so on. Now, we can use an example, a simple example. Let's say Paul and Jane are a married couple who come from humble beginnings. Now, their own parents survived through the Great Depression and struggled to make ends meet. They decided that they never want their children to go through the same experience, so they live a comfortable yet frugal life to build up a sizable savings account. Through their estate plan, they bequeath their life savings to their only child, and years later, the only child, who'll call him Simon, decides to use his inheritance to buy a rental property. After several years, he uses his profit to buy additional income properties, and by the time he retires, he passes on a robust rental property business to his daughter, Sandra. The example I just gave demonstrates how family wealth can be created and passed on. In this case, Paul and Jane's son Simon made the wise decision to use his inheritance to invest in real estate. He then created even more wealth and passed it on to Sandra, who will likely be able to pass it on the family business to her own children. Building family wealth is not an easy task, but when it goes well, it can be compounded with each passing generation. Investing in real estate is just one of many ways to build generational wealth, which can take many shapes. And here are some examples: real estate, savings, cash, life insurance policies, investments, family businesses, antiques and heirlooms, collectible items, etc. Generational wealth is important because, I mean, the cost of living is quite expensive right now. So you want to have your children and their children to have a simpler life, and we know that it's not going to be simpler as the years go by. Although anyone can create their own wealth, those who have access to family wealth have the advantage. The high cost of education, coupled with low wages and high cost of living, can make it difficult to get ahead. And if you don't come from family money, you may very well be familiar with the burden of debt. Creating wealth might not be an option until later in life, as it can take years to pay off school loans and credit card debts. So, first of all, in order to build generational wealth, here are a few strategies. You need to set up a trust. One of the most practical steps you can take to protect your generational wealth is to set up a trust fund. Trust funds can sometimes get a bad rap, but in reality, they are a powerful estate planning tool that allows you to have more control over how your wealth is passed on. So, first and foremost, assess assets placed within a trust will allow you to avoid probate and certain taxes. That means that your children's inheritance will be better sheltered from legal and certain taxes that can affect your inheritance. Second, you get to decide on what terms your children will be receiving their inheritance. For example, you could designate that each of your children will receive their inheritances in increments and only once they meet a certain milestone. Like we've seen the movies whereby, they had the guy would have to get married by the age of 20 in order to receive his inheritance. And those are just some of the terms that you can stipulate in the trust. And invest your money. Time and appreciation make up a powerful combination for growing your wealth without having to put in extra work. Investments. That is the second strategy. Diligently tucking your money away into a savings account is certainly laudable, but unfortunately, it won't stand the test of time. Due to inflation, the value of your rand today will only be worth a fraction of a dollar or rand for your children's generation. Instead of passing on a devalued lump sum, you can make a greater impact by investing your money in a way that it will be worth much more by the time your children receive their inheritance. And you can consider stocks, bonds, mutual and exchange traded funds, retirement investment account, annuities, cryptocurrencies, which is like big nowadays, commodities, certificates of deposits, real estate. And number three, start a business to pass down. If you have an entrepreneurial disposition, consider starting your own business. Family businesses account for the majority of the world's wealth and contributed to 57% of the US gross domestic product. The majority of startups fail. Yes, so starting a business has many risks to consider. However, if you're successful, you'll have a legacy that you can pass on to future generations. Alternatively, your children can choose to sell off your business and reinvest the proceeds in other ways. If you look at other businesses that have done really well, Walmart is an example of a business or a family business that was started and passed down, and it has now become generational wealth. The famous car brands as well, famous clothing brands, clothing stores. We have the Versace's, the Gucci's, etc. It started by one person. One person decided to take one for the team, start the business, and now it is something that is known globally and passed down from one person to another. And we know only the elite and only those who can afford are the ones who actually purchase that. But you don't have to be like the Versace's and the Gucci's. You can be like the Walmarts. You can be like the ShopRites even. Let's not even go to Walmart. Let's go to the ShopRites and the Ackermans right here locally. Something that started with one person having a tuck shop in the local area, in the local vicinity, which has now become a retail store, which is not just locally, but has expanded to other parts of the continent. So think about it. Sit down, create a plan for yourself. It's not going to be easy. Nothing is ever easy, but with consistency and commitment, you can create a generational wealth now and for decades and generations to come. It is 12:20. You are listening to the Mid-Morning Talk on Salam Media with me, Mara Mukwanda. Please stay with us. We will be right back.